Welcome to Dracaena Wines podcast. Our wines plus your moments equals great memories. I'm your host, Lori, and this is a podcast about all things wine. Welcome to this week's episode. Today is a Dracaena's Wine on Wine installment, and I am honored to have interviewed Peter Weber, president of the Cork Quality Council. The Cork Quality Council is a non-profit organization founded to promote education and improve quality assurance performance for the wine and cork industries. We discuss the biology behind a cork tree, how cork is produced, and that nasty little thing we are all familiar with, cork taint. Through this council, research has been performed to help improve the quality of cork. On their website, in which you can find the link on our show notes, you can find out more about sustainability, the cork forests, cork harvesting and production, and wine aging. Enjoy. Sláinte. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Dracaena Wines on Wine. And today I have a very special guest for you guys, and I'm so excited to introduce to you Peter Weber. He is the president of the Cork Quality Council. And, any wine lover, we need to know how our cork is going to do, right? We're all so concerned about getting good quality cork and making sure that our wines are extremely wonderful, when we go to drink them. We don't want any issues with the cork. And I personally think that this Quality Control Council really has done a miraculous job with making sure that this occurs, because if you look at the research, there used to be a lot more of cork taint and just a lot more cork that just wasn't high quality, and nowadays we don't really hear about that so much. So I'd love to introduce you to Peter Weber. So hi Peter, how you doing?
Hello, it's really great to be here.
I am honored to have you here. It's great to get to meet you.
Sure. Well, tell me, how would you like me to best talk about cork?
Well, I've got some questions for you. The first thing I have to ask you is, I did a little Google and LinkedIn and, a little behind the scenes search on you, and you went to Yale. I'm like, wow. And you studied European history. So I have to ask, how do you go from a Yale person who studies European history to cork?
Well, frankly, Yale or any other school, European history probably leaves you running when you get out. And so I did a lot of work with computers and analytical type things, and one of my jobs as an intern, I was working for a market research company, which ended up buying a mail order winery, and they thought that would be something that would be up my alley because I had shown them that I could do the analytical work necessary, and it became a very successful brand. I did that for about 12 years and went into business for myself, and one of my clients was the Cork Quality Council, and I knew several people in it, and this was just about the time that the plastic corks were coming out. And frankly, it was an interesting proposition. There had not been much research with closures of any kind. Everyone assumed corks worked, and people would call me up and ask me what is the perpendicular reflex of cork, and I'd say, I don't know. I mean, we don't measure that. I mean, you probably have to measure that because you're making a plastic substitute, but it just goes in the wine bottle just like it has for hundreds of years, and everything seems to work. But in any case, at that time, cork taint was becoming well known. The people selling plastic corks were really working overtime talking about that as well. And at that time, the plastic corks, and by the way, they work now, but at that time, they didn't even keep the wine in a bottle. So I thought my friends were kind of upset in the cork industry. They weren't sure why they had become public enemy number one, and because they've been working within the wine industry their entire lives. It seemed like an interesting proposition, and basically they had me put together some research projects, which it was interesting because it was done here in the United States, and obviously the long-term solution to cork problems is going to be in Europe where the corks are made. But we had so much of the friction was here that it made sense. We were highly motivated to do something, and we came up with some theories on how TCA, which is the cause of cork taint, goes from the cork to the bottle, as opposed to, we now know it goes from the barrel, can come from other places as well, but we figured out how this worked, and we figured out how to measure it, because it used to be everybody would take a smell of a wine glass and say, I think that's got cork taint, or if you're in Portugal, you might say, I don't know what you're talking about. That smells perfectly fine to me. And it was nice for us to find some hard and fast chemical analysis and say, well, this has 2 parts per trillion of this chemical, so therefore this is, we're setting this back. And we were able to really, once we were getting both the Portuguese and Spanish and all using the same chemical analysis, we saw the level of TCA just drop by, well, actually our level right now is 95% lower now than it was back then. So it's really pretty cleaned up. And frankly, TCA is, I don't want to say it's gone, but it's kind of have to look hard to find it. And if it wasn't for the fact that cork taint is the one wine flaw that everybody seems to know, I think it would be pretty rare. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that I run into bacteriological problems in wine much more than I do TCA. And obviously, oxidation and storage problems are much more common as well. But cork taint is well known, and it's not your retailer's fault. It's not your winery's fault. It's a pretty good scapegoat. So we still hear a lot of TCA, and it does exist, and it is our organization's job to try to reduce it to absolutely nothing, and we're pretty close. But it was a great movement, and we were very proud that we were able to find to make so much improvement so quickly.
And so were you into wine when they offered, when this opportunity came in?
Yeah, I had been president of a winery for about 12 years, and had recently gone into consulting myself. So I had winery and retail clients. So I guess I've been in the wine business out here since 1979. I have a cellar full of wines from the 70s, and the corks are still good. I'm really happy at that history, that being a young man in the wine business back then was kind of fun.
Right.
And I'm sure it's always fun, but it seemed particularly fun back then.
So tell me, I am a huge science geek, and anybody who listens to my podcast or reads my blog posts, they know I'm a science geek. But for those who aren't, what exactly is cork?
Well, cork is it's actually a term used throughout botany. It's basically the outer layer of the bark of the tree. It's just past the epidermis, but before you get to the very rough edge. And what's so interesting about cork, as we refer to it, is that it comes from an oak tree, cork, which is really distinguished by how thick the cork layer is, and frankly, to punch a cork out, we have to, this is a piece of bark, and as you can see, the corks get punched out of it. So the cork bark is actually that thick before it can be used, and you won't find that on any other kinds of tree. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons why the cork and cork trees have been used for thousands of years.
I always tell people, remember back when you were in high school and you were studying the difference between an animal cell and a plant cell. It was always a cork cell. It was always a cork cell that you had.
the reason why they call them cells is because who was who invented the microscope? But anyway,
Leeuwenhoek.
When he was looking through at the cork cells, he thought they looked like the little monastery cells that the monks would stay in, and so that's why he picked that word.
Yeah. See, science geeks unite. So you had mentioned that it is an oak tree family, and it's Quercus suber, right? What specifically about that species makes it the perfect tree? Because there's hundreds of different oaks out there. So what makes that one so perfect?
It's really just the bark. If you're just looking at the shape of the tree, a cork oak does not look that different than a California oak. They're both evergreens, and they've got a nice round crown, but frankly, it's bark, very thick. It protects the tree theoretically from fire, and also it's loaded with suberin, which is the kind of fatty substance that's just now, I think, being used by one of the companies making cosmetics, and I think the suberin kind of is a moisture barrier, a selective moisture barrier. So it will allow the cork tree to get by in a desert area that other trees probably couldn't handle. So the thick bark really, I think, allows a one-way humidity. So it does a good job of letting moisture in, but a really good job of not letting moisture back out. And so it's helped to make this tree, one of the endemic trees in the Mediterranean area. Basically, the reason why the cork oak is very much in favor of the world of the United Nations and different world groups is that they kind of look at it as the thing that's stopping the spread of the Sahara Desert all the way to the Mediterranean, because basically that tree is holding the ground together, and without it, it's going to be sand.
Oh, wow. So oaks, now I've got to remember my botany. Oak is a, does it have a taproot? No.
Well,
right?
It usually does. The cork oak has a taproot, not a famously deep one, but enough so that talking to people in like Florida, it's not doing too well there because it's getting too wet and salty. So it'll have a taproot, but it also spreads out because it's really responsible for holding the ground together, and that's why there's a fairly large international support for the cork industry because of the environmental reasons.
Right.
And the theory is that there are hundreds of thousands of people employed by the cork industry, and that's because we use corks in wine. And the concern is that if we stop using corks in wine, the cork trees will lose their long-term value and they will quickly become firewood. And so it's not, I think, that the world is trying to get involved in the wine business, but they really see the Cork Oaks as a very valuable
environmental stability. Right. Yeah. But so now with that, in wine, we always talk about terroir, right? There's, wine has terroir. You want to be able to taste the soil. You want to do all this. Well, this Cork Oak, there's different countries that the Cork Oak grows in, but it's the same species. So is there such a thing as a terroir for Cork?
Well, I'm sure there is. We have members at various times. We've had them from Sardinia, and believe it or not, the people there thought the Sardinian oak was made better cork than anything else. I've heard the same from the Spanish and the Portuguese. I think we'll agree on this that North Africa is not as good because, after all, we don't have any North African cork people in our group. So it's hard for me to tell. Clearly, there is some differences. For instance, in Sardinia, it's a little drier. They harvest the cork tree there every 10 years as opposed to every 9 years in Portugal. Theoretically, I've had people come out here. We've got some magnificent plantings of cork trees left over from concerns over shortages during the World War. So around UC Davis, they've got some huge old trees. And some of them are rather young. And I remember some of the guys from Sardinia were there, and we went to a restaurant, and there was a tree that was, well, it was big, not big around. And they were speaking and said, this tree is 100 years old. And we asked the owner, how old was it? He said 20 years old. And so then a bunch of Italian, I couldn't keep up, and they assured me that our terroir would be no good at all, and the cork tree could not possibly be any good for wine because it would be too spongy. So I don't know. We do have discussions. I think humidity and I should say moisture content is probably the biggest difference. There have been people who have said that one forest has more cork taint than other forests. Other people say emphatically that's not true. I know people who make a living walking around forests, looking at cork trees, inspecting them, deciding whether or not it's worth making an offer on that, on that this harvest. So obviously there's some differences, but I think most of it has to do with quality. I think what people really want is they want trees with bark this thick. Otherwise, they can't really make wine corks out of it. Okay. And they would have to make agglomerated particles, which can still be used, but that's not where you get the hero wine cork that you make your money from.
Right. And is there like a Christmas tree farm for Cork Oaks? Like, are they planting? Is it a farm? Is it this tree is here and I've got to go 100 feet over there to get to another one? Well,
I think the way it really goes is, oddly enough, unlike most trees, a cork oak, if it doesn't come from an acorn, just seems to die. It doesn't seem to. There's something, the cuttings won't work. So basically, people. When I try to plant cork trees, I usually have a sapling, but it always has to come from an acorn, which kind of makes things probably a little slower. But yeah, people are planting, but the majority of this is still wild. I mean, this is like the native tree to Spain and Portugal. So the forests are usually unorganized. There's no rows, and I've seen a few places that look like orchards, but so far there's nothing wrong with that. But it just has not. It's been a very natural habitat. So it's most people take the cork as sort of loosely wooded land, and efficiently they might have animals in there eating grass, as well as every 9 years harvesting the cork. So it's kind of dual purpose land usually.
Oh, okay. So it's more natural than a Christmas tree farm. It's
yes. I mean, I'm sure there must be one. I have never seen one. You will see stands where basically almost every tree is a cork oak. So but
that's just from
there
nature.
There are hills, and that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So there's as vintners, the vines, the grapes. There's so many diseases that grapevines can be prone to. And we're always looking for ways to lower their susceptibility, doing research on, Pierce's disease and all this stuff. So are there specific diseases that the cork oak tree is susceptible to?
Well, I mean, it's a tree. It's considered pretty hardy.
Okay.
I mean, it will fall prey to, if it's wounded, it'll fall. There are pathogens that'll get through to it. I mean, in California, we've got the sudden oak death syndrome, which is, one virus. They have virus of different species, same genus in Portugal, but generally it's not. Nobody's had kind of any endemic problems. Curiously, it appears that the stripping the wood makes the trees last longer, and I'm thinking that maybe from a pathogen standpoint, that every 9 years getting removal of anything that might be a problem. So obviously for a year it's kind of naked, but then it's always got a nice clean skin that isn't going to have any remaining pathogens with it. So I do think the harvesting actually helps keep disease down.
So that's actually perfect lead into my next question, because there's a lot of people out there who are and justly stating that harvesting cork is harming the tree. They're kind of saying it's like when you shoot an animal for its husk or its fur or whatever, and they're saying that you're harming the tree. So what do you think about those people who are saying that? Like, what do you want to say to them?
I'd like to say that the animal allegory is good, except the animal is a sheep, and it's basically like shearing the wool off the sheep, and it's an opportunity to take good care of the sheep. It's an opportunity to take good care of the tree. It's a very natural and not a dangerous thing to do. So it's basically a very sustainable harvest. There are all manners of laws that prohibit cutting down cork oak trees. That doesn't mean that hungry people wouldn't do something like that, but right now a cork tree is worth a lot more as a healthy cork tree than is as firewood. So actually the cork industry I think, really does promote health in the forest, and it's good for the tree. I think because of the stripping of the bark is good, but mostly it's making people make sure that they clear underbrush so there's not going to be forest fires. It makes people take care of it. I mean, so there are 100,000 people just in Portugal involved in the cork industry, and these are probably the most highly paid agricultural jobs in Portugal or Spain, and these are very rural areas. This is really important for the people, and obviously that's not a primary concern to the wine drinker. But my point would be that the cork industry is generally considered a model of sustainability, and it's very healthy for the tree, and it's healthy for the population as well.
And I had read or heard somewhere that the cork industry is actually like working at like a 99 point plus, 99.9% no waste, right? Like, right? Something on that, right?
Right. And they were like that before, they were efficient like a farmer is efficient before that became a marketing tactic. I saw guys back in the 1990s who were taking leftover cork dust and putting that into a boiler which helped power a generator which made their electricity. So basically nothing leaves cork plant. I mean, it's everything's used, and nothing actually permanently leaves the cork forest because the tree is still there growing more.
Right.
Very efficient.
That's fantastic. When I heard that, I was like, wow, like I knew that cork, makes the wine corks, and then there's cork board, there's cork, boards, and now there's cork flooring and stuff. But then I read about the dust and, all that. I'm like, they're just taking everything and use every single piece of it. There's no waste in the cork industry.
They really use everything. I sometimes joke that they probably, I don't know how they have a McDonald's franchise in Portugal, because I just see them sorting all the French fries so they're all the same height, and I don't know how they can possibly get anything done.
So on the front of it harming the tree, I know that there is a tree that is at least that has been shown to be over 230 years old, right? And so it's in Portugal, correct?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's not that uncommon. Right. But I know that at one point I came back with and basically spread some photographs around one tree in particular. We call it the Whistler tree, and that's well over 240 years old. Right. It's huge. It's magnificent. And I suspect there are plenty of trees that old. I don't think there are very many that big. But yeah, that would remind you of one of those famous white oak trees, like the one you had in your backyard, the kind you might see on a church or a college campus. Right. And it's hundreds of years old and just hundreds of feet across.
Massive.
In fact, that Whistler tree was the European Tree of the Year last year. They have a competition. Every country put forward the best story for their best tree.
Oh, yay! That's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Well, all I can say is if a tree that is being harvested for cork is over 230 years, it's not being harmed. It's not. No. It's not. It's being well taken care of.
It takes some skill. We put on demonstrations here every now and then, and I always try to fly someone out from Europe, because I don't want to be the guy who cuts too deeply. I'm sure it's not impossible to learn, but I'm not going to learn on the job. And we usually bring somebody else out, because basically you've got to cut into the bark, but not destroy the cambium.
Right.
Then you pry it loose, and depending on the time of year, if it's dry enough, that's really pretty easy to peel that bark away.
Okay. I have seen videos of it. It's on my bucket list to go and see it live, because it's incredible on the video. So I can only imagine what it looks like live. It's seriously on my bucket list to just go travel and see, a corking, day or week or whatever. I would love to see it from start to finish. All right, we're at the tree, and now here's a cork. I'd love to see that process. I think it would be incredible. So you had mentioned that some places harvest like every 9 years or every 10 years, and that is to allow the cork layer to get healthy
Right.
and thick enough. So I'm guessing it must be very regulated, right? They know tree A was harvested at, this date,
Yeah.
or tree B was at this date.
Generally, it's fairly low tech, and at the end of the harvest, some guy takes a big can of white paint and puts a number for that year. And so you'll come in the forest, you'll see there's a whole bunch of 9s, which means that they probably, well, you won't because they got harvested in 2018. But if you see some 0s, they're all going to get harvested this year.
Nice and simple. Just paint it. Nice and simple.
Right. There's probably room there if it's a really dry year or prices are not right. Some guys might let a few trees slide an extra year because nothing's going to happen but poorly to the tree. It's just that's how long they're going to probably have to go before they can proceed.
So going back to vineyards, right? We have some vines that are very productive, right? They produce a lot of tonnage, and then we have others that don't. And depending on your winemaking philosophy, and what you're looking to do, are there more productive oak trees and some that are less productive?
It's basically the size, and that's where you get into probably moisture, sunlight, nutrition of the soil. I don't think because it's not a Christmas tree farm situation, I don't think these guys really are controlling like we would our vines.
Right.
So it's more like these are wild vines in a sense. And obviously some vines are more productive than others, but
right. Yeah, I guess if it's like that's a perfect analogy. It's a wild vine. They let them go, they let them do what they need to do, and then when it's thick enough, that's when they're going to harvest. Okay. So I've seen the video of cork harvesting. Is there any research? Do we know the history of when they decided, hey, look at this, we can produce this cork? Is there a history of that?
Well, clearly they were using cork in ancient Rome, and there's plenty of documentation of that. I think using the current cork stopper is credited to basically Dom Perignon, who, when he made his first sparkling wine, and he used something to hold the wine back into the bottle.
So there is what's the name of that tool? The special saw thing. Is there a name for that?
It's an axe, actually.
Oh, it's an axe.
Yes, there is, and it's. I should have it top of the tip of my tongue, but it's not. It's very old, and it's got a very broad blade that allows them to make a long, narrow cut, and then it's very strong, and it's got a very strong handle with a piece of metal on the other end, which allows people to kind of use it as a lever,
like a wedge, like a wedge. And is that tool an old tool? Has that been through, or is that something?
I think it's been there. It's called a machada.
Machada.
And it's I see nothing on a machada that could not have been made in 1200. So it's pretty old school.
Okay.
And there might be some kind of pneumatic, better way to do it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
I think the people still like that the hand tool, and I think it's probably safer. You can't get in that much trouble because you've got a feel for what's going on in every tug and turn.
Right. And you had mentioned earlier that the people are very well trained. Like, is it like an internship? They come and they practice before they
I don't know. I think it's probably a family thing.
Oh.
It seems like this a multi-generational task. I know at one point one of my bucket lists is I was trying to get UC Davis to harvest some of their trees. I envisioned them having a seminar where we actually have a dozen people learn how to harvest cork trees every year. And
I'd sign up. I'd sign up.
Well, maybe we'll get it done yet.
I would so sign up for that. That's awesome. All right, so it actually, I read that wine corks actually only account for about 25% of the total production by weight of this.
That's probably true.
Of the cork revenues. So what does the cork, so we know there's cork floors, like I said, and there's boards. Does it all get harvested the same way? And then, like, how does it get determined this is going to be a cork or this is going to be flooring or?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the thickness again. It's going to get harvested like this. When they punch all these holes out, what's left, that goes into a hopper to be ground up. So will all the cork that is this thick. So will little bits and pieces. So will you probably harvest cork twice before it's regular enough to even consider making wine corks out. So there's a lot of the first harvest, some thick, knotty. 10 years later, you try it again. It's better, but still nothing good. Finally, 9 years after that, you might get something that you can work with. So there's a fair amount of wood that obviously is not going to be wine cork, and there's obviously a lot of waste. And even though it might be 20% of the weight is wine cork, it's still 70+% of the money. So that kind of creates maybe a false economy, I think, that this cork waste probably is worth more than they think it is because it's left over from the cork product. It's a very valuable commodity for the flooring people, the people make gaskets, and et cetera, et cetera. And we're starting to see that today with people are paying more for the this. I think when I first got in the business, it was called waste. And I don't think anybody calls it waste anymore. I think it's pretty much a solid gold all the way.
Right. All right. So I'm going to ask the big question, and you kind of brought it up, the whole TCA thing and everything. I hate the artificial corks, the plastic corks. When we went through that little phase of the plastic corks, I was miserable. I'm thrilled that I don't really see them very much at all anywhere. But people were anti that. People in America are very anti screw caps, and that's kind of coming along. And I don't have any issues with a screw cap, but I think that their research has improved to allow it better. Do you see now that Americans are becoming a little bit more, all right, it's a screw cap type thing? How is that impacting the cork industry?
Well, the cork industry actually is. I've been tracking sales by closure since 2010 with Nielsen numbers, and I just tracked the 100 largest premium brands. I say premium because our target group is wines over $6, and frankly, wines under $6 have been declining every year anyway. But in that category, we've just had our highest month ever in terms of market share. So actually, Cork is going up compared to the alternatives. And, part of that, there's different kinds of alternatives, but clearly are different than they were 10 years ago. They used to be only on cheap wines, and they're not only on cheap wines now. And there used to be a lot of people who thought that was a terrible thing, and now I think people still prefer cork, but probably fewer people think screw caps are terrible. What I do see is, I think, some recognition by the screw cap manufacturers themselves that their product has to be more cork-like, and it's hard to do. I mean, normal cork is when you compress it, put it into a bottle, there's maybe 3 mLs of oxygen that's going to slowly dissipate. Diffuse is the right word. And it's going from cell to cell to cell. It takes about 8 months to fully happen. So there's a small, minor oxidation, and then it stops because the pressure is equalized. The screw caps with the metal liners, no oxygen at all. You get some reductive aromas, and some winemakers say that's fine, but most are a little bit not great about reductive aromas. And that's why nowadays you can see the screw cap guys are selling these different liners that allow some oxygen to permeate. Mm-hmm. And I take that as a fairly strong sign that they know that they need to have some oxygen, because otherwise why would they have an entire array of different permeable layers? But the problem with a permeable layer is it never stops. The cork lets oxygen in for the permeable membrane. It's going to keep letting oxygen in until you drink the wine. So, to me, I think on a lifetime basis, people say that there's more variance in oxygen with cork, because one cork might have 3 milliliters, one might have 4, one might have a little tighter cells, so it might take 5 months to come out as opposed to 9 months. But the truth is, after 10 months or a year, there's no more oxygen coming through. You store a screw cap wine for 3 years, you've now got 3 years of permeation. So, frankly, from a lifetime basis, I find the cork to be much more consistent and much more reliable with the oxygen. And so I think that's an advantage we're going to continue. And I think it's been recognized. I mean, it's by the people who use alternatives already.
And you had talked about the cork cell size. So I know that now this is more my husband's realm than me for the winemaking aspect of it, but the key buy is very specific cork cell size, whatever. And I know that the different cork sizes determine the price also. So is that determined by that? It shouldn't be the thickness. So what's making that different? Is that a humidity thing? Is that?
Well, it's generally length. These are the strip determines the length of the cork.
Right.
Now, the corks in this, which somebody sent me many years ago, they're nice, but they're not as big as this other fancy cork that somebody else gave me. So I guess you would the longer one costs more,
But I'm talking about the compression.
Okay. Well,
right. There's different compression when you're purchasing cork.
Actually,
there's different.
Most cork companies don't sell by compression.
Okay.
We test the compression in the insertion force and the extraction forces, but most of the grading has to do with how tight the wood is, how many lenticels it has.
Right. Okay.
And I think that can be a good indication of how tight the cork is. It's also just prettier. It's a cosmetic purchase. Theoretically, those lenticels are going at 90-degree angles, so they're letting oxygen in from the bark to the tree, which means that it's not really providing a leak for the wine or the air. Right. So it doesn't look great. It doesn't look as good as a perfectly smooth cork, but that has a huge difference in price.
Right.
And it's partly because they're rare. They look great, and they're probably a little. I would assume they might be a little more consistent than something that has more lenticels. I guess mostly looks.
Oh, okay. All right. So back to being the science geek. I read a research article, an actual peer-reviewed article that took wine people who enjoyed wine, and put them in a dark room. And so they didn't know white, red, they didn't know anything. And they didn't even do it real. They did a artificial pop or an artificial screw cap noise, that's whatever. And they poured the wine. So the wine was the same, but they did that. And it was statistically proven that people rated the wine higher with the cork sound versus the screw cap sound. So
sure, I saw that study too. It was, and I've seen the same study with pictures. I've seen the same study with just outright basically lies, where they just say this came from this,
right.
This came from that. But this was nice. It's all audio, and it's usually a fairly consistent. Wine enjoyment is very
multi-sensory.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I used to joke with my wife would have a bad day, and it worked. The wine did not taste good that day, and on a good day, it tastes much better.
Yeah.
And I think that's always the case.
Yeah. And it's, it's the same thing, you go, and if you're with a bunch of friends, or you're at a winery and you're having a good time and everything is all happy, you go, you buy those bottles, and then you bring it home and you drink it. You're like, whoa,
Sure.
So
we see, I've done a lot of sensory research on the cork taint and what level do people, winemakers sit around and they smell 3 glasses, one of which has 2 parts per trillion, and the other 2 have 0, and they can detect, very small amounts of TCA. And yet, when you go to a restaurant and say, "Give me your wine that was returned," nothing has less than 10 parts per trillion of TCA. I mean, it's, partly obviously people are always embarrassed to send things back, but I think they're there with their friends. They're there to enjoy. They're not there to see if they can find something wrong. Right. And there are big differences based on people's point of view. I think of that moment.
Right. So, can you please explain to my listeners what exactly is cork taint? What causes that?
Well, fortunately, cork taint is pretty well defined, and it's basically, loosely it's a haloanisole, but in real life, for cork taint, it's one haloanisole, and that is trichloroanisole. And there are others in the news. We've heard of bromoanisols. They were big in the drug business in New Jersey. They got into some aspirin bottles. It's common in pallets. You find it in bananas, and there are other haloanisols, but for some reason, the chloroanisole, which is basically a little bit of chlorine and a phenol, get together. That's one associated. If you find one of the other haloanisols in your wine, chances are it came from the wood in the cellar or the pallets or something like that. But chloroanisole is very common. People say it smells like wet newspaper. It's not really a simile. It is wet newspaper. It has a trichloroanisole. And I think it's most interesting to look at it as kind of a byproduct of microorganisms defending themselves. Chlorophenols are fairly common. They're used as wood preservatives and various other things, and you can make chlorophenol as easily as pouring some bleach on a piece of plywood. By the time it gets to the bottom of the plywood, it is full of chlorophenol, and it doesn't take a whole lot more than that. Chlorophenols are really bad for microorganisms, and they try to fight back. And they fight back by basically trying to methylate that phenol into an anisole, which they do, and then you get a very aromatic compound. If you ever are in the woods and have been dry for several weeks, so there's a light rain, you can just smell all these aromatics. Many of them are chlorophenols, or anisols coming out of the forest, and they're very easy to detect. We're very sensitive to them. We can easily detect them at the parts per trillion level. And most bad smells are at the part per billion level. So these are. The other problem with trichloroanisole is that its natural solvent is about a 15% ethanol solution. So basically, wine is the natural solvent for it, and not only that, but we stick our nose in there and regard it. So we are doing everything we possibly can to detect TCA,
right.
And because you can actually find TCA up and down the supermarket in the produce aisle. I can smell bananas all the time, raisins, apples. I mean, it's everywhere. And I'm not saying, obviously we don't want any corks. That's what we try to get rid of. But it's not a plague invented for the wine industry. It's a very common chemical. Actually, it's a really we love to smell our wine, and it's really easy to tell if there's any trichloroanisole. Right. But that's what cork taint is. I know some of the research we did when we first started was there were dozens of other chemicals that were said associated with cork taints, and I went to a couple. I usually go to the Sonoma County Harvest Fair only because I live in Sonoma County. But it's a place where trained experts, accept wines or reject them as being flawed. And we went to took all the flawed wines and all the accepted wines and came back and tested them for all these dozens of compounds, and found that you think geosmin is a cause. Well, there's just as much geosmin as there was in the When it was rejected, because frequently jasmine tends to fall apart, the acid that most wines have. And so it's like people were saying, this wine has cork taint, what chemicals are in it? And they were not finding the cause. And basically what we found, the only compound we found that had predictive value was TCA. And as we attacked TCA, we seem to be succeeding getting rid of cork taint. So I think it would have been much more difficult if there were 24 causes for cork taint, but there's not.
That's good. And basically, how you're attacking it is more not at the tree level, not at the cork level. It's at the preparation, the cleansing level, correct?
Right. There's several ways to get rid of it. You see, a fair amount of corks now are not these beautiful one-piece corks. They're kind of little bits of ground-up cork glued together. They're comparatively inexpensive, but they have another good thing. Because small little bits, we can really clean them, so there's no TCA in them. So we have now really improved the, it's one thing to take great precautions on expensive corks, but now even the inexpensive corks are basically in a good position because we can wash the taint out of them. People are checking for TCA in the wood as it comes into the factory. Basically, the first 8 years of our work, we were checking corks for TCA when they got off the ship, and then sending it back. And so that did get everyone's attention. It's not a terrible way to do things, but now everything's being done at the point of manufacture, and they've got some companies now. There's probably several actually have these Rube Goldberg machines who are actually testing individual corks with a gas chromatography machine and testing each one before they come over here. And it's people in Portugal are really driven to have clean corks. I don't think the winery people, I don't think they have any idea how much the manufacturers of cork are quality minded. It is a natural. Frankly, a cork could get TCA in the truck on the way to the winery, and we have had many cases where the back of the truck is full of TCA because TCAs happens all the time, so you can't really ever say TCA is never going to happen because TCA likes a wine cork. That's super in wax. TCA likes to be in wax, and it likes to be in alcohol. It doesn't like to be in water. So basically, cork is a fairly attractive host for TCA molecule.
Right. All right. Well, those are all of my questions. Did I miss anything that you want to talk about?
Well, no, I'm delighted to. I wanted, I think we did talk about it. I wanted to make sure people understood that the cork doesn't breathe. Instead, it basically releases some of its own oxygen into the wine, which is a big difference from what some people perceive, and frankly is the biggest difference between cork and any alternative. You can't have those 40 million cells in 1 square milliliter that you have in a cork. You can't make that with plastic. You can't make that with tin. So it's something that nature can do, but we can't. And I think that's an important distinction. I'm glad we covered it.
And so, if somebody wants to find out more about the cork quality, all of that, where can they go? Where can they find you? are they on? Are you on social media? Are you everywhere?
Well, we're probably not everywhere. Our members are basically most of the big cork companies in the U.S. And we have a website called corkqc.com, and there's some information there that's available to people. It lists the different cork companies who finance our group and who have financed this research. And, I encourage people to follow up and, try to do business with people who are supporting the industry. Right. And they're good companies too. So it's an easy thing to do. I don't have to ask people to work hard on that front.
Right, and that link will be in the show notes, so anybody can find. I'll have a link to that right there in the show notes. And are you on social media at all? Is there?
Well, we have a campaign that we're doing with the Portuguese government, and that has a social media site called 100% Cork.
Okay.
And it's a really great site, but it's not a Cork QC site, but it's it's a great site for answering questions on cork, and on top of that, it provides information for people who are interested in cork trade, craft, and things like that. People who want to sew something out of cork fabric or anything like that. There's a lot of things that are interesting. So that's 100% Cork on Facebook is a pretty popular site.
Okay.
In fact, it's one of the. I think we looked at it as one of the more. We've got, I guess, 100,000 supporters. So
wow!
It's a pretty big site.
That's pretty big. Yeah. And I'll look that up, and I will put that into the show notes also, so people can have the link to that. But I want to thank you for taking your time out of your schedule to talk to me and to share the information about the cork. But before I let you go, are you willing to play my little game of I call it the Phoebe game because I don't really know what it's really called. Opposites at them. So I call it the Phoebe game or the game of opposites. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just kind of, I'm going to give you two words. They're opposites of each other. And whichever one resonates with you more. That's all that matters.
So I'm thinking A or B.
Yes.
Okay.
That's all you have to do. So I kind of get you into the groove with non-wine stuff, and then I get into wine stuff. All right? All right. So just whichever one resonates with you. Night or day?
Day.
Okay. Sunset or sunrise?
Sunrise.
Black or white?
Black.
Walk or run?
Walk.
Food or drink?
Food.
Okay. Old world or new world?
Old world.
Sweet or dry?
Dry.
Bubbles or still?
Still.
Oak or stainless?
Oak.
Drink now or drink later?
Later.
Blend or varietal?
Blend.
Vintage or non-vintage?
Vintage.
Okay. Cork or screw cap?
Yeah, right. I'm sorry.
Napa or Sonoma?
Sonoma for me.
Commercial or indigenous?
Indigenous.
All right. Bordeaux or Rhone?
Bordeaux.
And warm climate or cool climate?
Cool.
There you go. See, that wasn't tough, right?
No, that wasn't. That was very good.
Yeah.
That's some good data.
It's it's kind of a psychology type thing. Like the more I do them, it's funny. I see groupings, and that I always like to see if that grouping stays together. Like if somebody says night, like 99% of the people say sunset. And if somebody says day, they say sunrise, you know.
Right.
And then if they say old world, it usually is drink later.
Right.
And if they say new world, they usually say drink now. So there's just kind of, you know.
Sure. Well, I mean, part of it, I mean, it's do kind of. I've been in Sonoma County. I moved here in 1979, so I kind of have to hold out for cool climate and Sonoma. So I'm kind of boxed in a little.
Yeah. But anyway, Peter, thank you very, very much for coming on and sharing your expertise in cork and, you know, the quality of it. And, you know, please, if there's anything else you would like us to talk about or whatever, I would love to learn more about cork and how it's produced and all of that.
It's a great experience. And thank you for having me on the show. It was a real pleasure. I hope to meet you someday, and when I'm down your way. And not every day I get to meet a biochemist from New Jersey. We're doing this.
That's true. The New Jersey connection, right?
Right.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great night. Have a very, very happy New Year. And I wish you nothing but success and health and happiness in the new year.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Did you know that Dracaena Wines now has a wine club? We named it the Chalk Club. Draco is on our label, but Vegas was getting a little jealous, so we decided he deserved to be our club spokesdog. In Las Vegas, betting chalk means that you are betting on all of the favorites. We are betting that we are one of your favorite wineries, so we thought the name was apropos. The club is simple, yet a bit different than most. When you wager on us, we will ship you 3 bottles of wine twice a year, once in April and once in September. You can choose all red or mix of red and rosé. You immediately receive 15% off of all your wine purchases throughout the year, but what makes our club stand out is the progressive discount. Let your club membership ride into the next year. Your discount increases. Each year you parlay your membership, you receive an additional 5% off up to a planned maximum of 25%. Your club shipments are discounted to a flat $15, plus we'll cover your club shipping cost for your second shipment. That's $15 house money in a sure bet for you. So please head to our website, dracaenawines.com, and find out all of the benefits of joining the Chalk Club and how to sign up. We've stacked the odds so that you can get our award-winning wines without breaking the bank. Thanks for listening to Dracaena Wines podcast. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like us to discuss, please reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and Periscope as @Dracaena Wines. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt Budd, or email us at dracaenawines.com. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher to help others find us more easily. We are found on all of your favorite aggregators. To subscribe easily to iTunes, go to bit.ly/Dracaena podcast. That's bit.ly/Dracaena podcast. And that's a capital D for Dracaena and capital P for podcast. Please check out our award-winning wines and find out about our wine club at dracaenawines.com. And remember to always pursue your passion. Sláinte!